The original concept was something I came up with in high school, said Brevik, who went to school in California's Bay Area and got the idea for the game's name from local peak Mount Diablo. It's all I've ever wanted to do, make games. And even in high school, I was thinking about what kinds of games I could make and what names I could use. The original concept for Diablo was more of a traditional party-based RPG, turn-based and influenced by Brevik's love of games like Rogue and NetHack. After college, Brevik found himself working at a digital clip art business. When the company went under, a few former employees went on to launch their own venture, named after a secret project that their former employer had been working on called Project Condor. Thus, Condor Games was born. It would be while working for Condor that Brevik put together a design document for Diablo, describing it as a turn-based, single-player DOS game that would have expansion packs, like booster packs for Magic the Gathering cards. It also had permadeath, says Brevik. That was a big feature of roguelikes, so that's why I wanted that. I loved the way Primal Rage looked in the arcade, said Brevik. It used stop motion for all its characters and graphics, and Brevik wanted to use a sort of stop motion art style for Diablo. But once he learned how expensive and time-consuming it would be, the idea was shelved.
So work began on Diablo probably in earnest in late 1993. We created a company, my friends and I, who I'd met at a previous company. We started pitching Diablo to a bunch of different places. The game was always titled Diablo. The name Diablo comes from a mountain here in the San Francisco Bay Area that I lived at the base of that mountain called Mount Diablo. I didn't speak any Spanish, so once I found out what the name meant for the mountain, then I said, hey, that's going to make a great video game name someday. So we pitched it as Diablo, and the name never really left.
While Condor Games was planning out Diablo, it was also working on some other sports and licensed games, including the Sega Genesis game Justice League Task Force. Brevik remembers taking the latter game to show it at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, and finding an unexpected comrade in arms in developers Silicon and Synapse, which would eventually become Blizzard Entertainment. We show up, and we have our game on display, and we look over and there's another version of the product for Super Nintendo, Brevik said. Condor had no idea there was a Super Nintendo version of Task Force being made, and yet the two games were still strangely similar. Condor wound up talking to the developers, Silicon and Synapse, who also happened to have dreams of striking out on their own and making their own original PC game. We've been trying to pitch this game idea to a whole bunch of people, and they have said no, role-playing games are dead. There is no way we are investing in an RPG, said Brevik. But after Silicon and Synapse became Blizzard and made Warcraft, they came back to Condor and heard the studio's pitch for Diablo. They liked what they heard and offered to publish the game. We were very excited, so we signed a contract to do Diablo, remembers Brevik. The studio then had to figure out what, exactly, this turn-based isometric game it had been thinking about for so long would actually look like, and how it would be angled and rendered on screen. This was not easy back then. I kind of took a screen grab of XCOM, and we just took that and put it right into Diablo, said Brevik. So the actual tile square basis, the same shape and size, is exactly the same. Brevik also remembers that the decision to make the game real-time, rather than turn-based, as a controversial one. He said that, despite rumors to the contrary, it's not true that when Condor first pitched the game, Blizzard said it was great, but that it had to be real-time and multiplayer. That came later, after development of the game had begun. Eventually, Blizzard South, they approached us and said, well, we'd really like to make this a real-time game, recalls Brevik. At first, he says, he was adamantly against it. He loved classic turn-based dungeon crawlers like Rogue, and he didn't want to give up turns because giving players time to agonize over their decisions could create so much delicious drama.
Blizzard first became involved when we got together for a trade show. It was Consumer Electronics Show, and we were showing off Justice League Task Force. We were doing the Sega Genesis version, and then another development company was working on the Super Nintendo version. We didn't realize that there was a Super Nintendo version of it, and they didn't realize that there was a Genesis version of it. So we didn't share any kind of design or anything like that, or any kind of assets or whatever. But strangely, the games were very similar. They looked like they could have been developed in tandem, and so the two companies instantly kind of merged over our design sensibilities and our graphic style and everything like that. They changed their name from Silicon and Synapse to Blizzard Entertainment. They said, okay, well, we're working on this title, come take a look. And I went to their little meeting room that they had rented, and they showed off Warcraft.
Work completed.
And they said, yeah, we're also looking for other titles. So we're looking to work with people that we think are good developers. And I said, well, we've got a great game idea, but nobody wants to, do this. So are you guys interested? And they said, well, after we finish Warcraft 1, we'll come out and you can pitch us. And they then agreed to do Diablo.
Blizzard North eventually put it to a vote. I voted no, but everyone else voted yes. That was when the action RPG was kind of born. At that point, Brevik fondly recalls clicking his mouse, watching his formerly turn-based warrior walk across a room in real time and smash a skeleton. And I remember saying out loud, "Oh my god, that was awesome." During development, Condor became Blizzard North. We were so excited to do Diablo that we signed the contract with Blizzard without realizing we just agreed to create the game for $300,000, said Brevik. We have 15 people in this studio, so are we just going to pay them $20,000 a year to do this? Then at one point, Blizzard South came to us and said, "Hey, we'd like to acquire you guys," Brevik said. That was a big relief, not having to worry about making payroll anymore. But 3DO got wind of it and didn't like the idea, so they started making their own pitches. So this bidding war started between Blizzard and 3DO, said Brevik. 3DO was offering us twice as much money, and we turned them down because we felt that Blizzard really got us and got the game. And we were so close in company culture and beliefs that we turned down twice as much money to get bought by Blizzard. Incidentally, Brevik recalls that late in '96, as Diablo's development was in crunch mode, a businessman named Sabir Baisha came to Brevik and said, basically, "I'm going to make email on the internet. I'll give you 10% of my company if you let me have a room in the back of your office to work." Brevik said, "No way, this doesn't make sense. Email on the internet? I already have email on the internet." And with Blizzard North crunching away on Diablo, Brevik remembers telling Baisha he couldn't spare any room to work on his company. Baisha's company came to be known as Hotmail, which went on to be worth roughly $400 million. So Brevik would have owned $40 million worth of the company, which in today's money would be roughly $77 million.
So at the time, PC RPGs in general were kind of in a very strange state. Sales had really declined on any kind of RPG at the time, and even though that was a huge genre earlier, when we went to go pitch Diablo to a bunch of different places, we got rejected 20 plus times. But we knew that this was an unusual kind of style of RPG. In a lot of ways, we wanted to kind of make the antithesis of what RPGs were at the time. We went out of our way to do that, to make sure that the graphics weren't elves and dragons. We wanted to make it, very different than that. We wanted to make sure that the style of game it was much more like the way that I used to play Dungeons and Dragons as a kid. I didn't really care so much about the story and things like that in Dungeons and Dragons. For me, it was much more about the loot. It was much more about getting the awesome Vorpal swords and stuff like that. And so I wanted a game that was ringing true with, a game that was more about, killing monsters and getting cool loot, rather than having a long story with a deep character customization and stuff like that. I wanted to focus more on the action side and more on the loot side. And so we felt like we had a great idea that separated us from the crowd. But I think that a lot of people, especially a lot of people in publishing at that time, weren't necessarily gamers. A lot of them were just businessmen who had learned that this genre isn't selling anymore. I don't care what kind of game you're pitching me. And so
one of the things we didn't like about role-playing games at the time is they all had like 25 minutes of character creation before you could get into the game, said Brevik. And Blizzard North had a lot of love for the menus in Doom, so they designed Diablo's UI with a lot of thematic inspiration from the first-person shooter. To meet the mom test, "Could my mom play this?" Brevik said. The idea was to make something that players could start playing as quickly as possible, with minimal hang-ups. We were ultra focused on making this thing great, and I think it paid off in the end, said Brevik. Crunch is never fun, but sometimes, at least for myself, I think it's a necessary evil. Brevik remembers running a contest after the game launched, offering to pay $100 to the first player who could kill Diablo. Shortly thereafter, a player used a health-swapping skill to run down to the final boss, swap health with him, nearly die, swap again and slay him. We promptly yanked that skill out of the game, said Brevik. Presumably, Blizzard North also paid the player his $100.
There were a bunch of times during development that I felt like this could be a hit, but the thing that really drove it home for me, while we were making the game, we would work and people would roll in and work all day, and then when it was time to go home, they weren't going home, they were playing the game that they had just spent all day working on. So I knew when that was happening that it could be something that was kind of addictive. The dream was never that it would do as well as it did. Our dream was maybe someday we can sell 25,000 copies. If we did that, maybe we could make a sequel. That was kind of the original dream. I had no real intent in making it, that it was going to be so addictive, or that wasn't really what we had set out to be. It was just the hopes of us being able to make the PC games that we love.